The prophecy says that a child with the same hair color as the first saint will become a princess and bring peace and stability to the empire. The saint healed tens of thousands of people and with one word stopped the bloody war. The child with the same hair color was she, Elsie Pruss. The first saint who helped the emperor build the empire had pink hair. Pink was the main color in the temple. So when the prophecy came, everyone understood its meaning, but no one thought that such a thing was possible. More and more rumors and questions appeared. But then Elsie Pruss was born. Unlike her parents, the baby had pink hair, and everyone was sure that she was the girl from the prophecy. Everyone prayed for the girl and said that she would become the next saint. Besides, Elsie was the daughter of a duke. The only thing was that everyone wanted to get closer to her. She chatted so much with everyone that even her mouth got tired. Elsie Pruss was taken to the imperial citadel. Everything was fine. The little girl coped with everything. She managed because he was there. The girl lived in a citadel away from her family, and the prince became her only ray of light. Perhaps it was because of him that Elsie took her studies seriously. At such a young age, it was difficult to prepare to become a princess. Sometimes she wanted to give up this life. The girl did not want to be a saint, but she could not let him down, the prince. Elsie felt like the happiest person in the empire next to this guy. In an instant, everything changed, as if God was playing a joke on her. It turned out that the prophecy changed out of the blue. The priest was confused. He himself did not know how to explain it or what to say. With tears in her eyes, Elsie ran out, screaming that even if the prophecy had changed, the prince would never abandon her. In the corridor, the girl met her lover. He said that he wanted to break off the engagement. Her heart was broken. There was no pity in his eyes, even though he said he was sorry. Elsie didn't understand why they couldn't be together. She loved him so much. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have been able to cope alone in this citadel. The girl began to remind him how everything was before, in the hope that the prince would change his mind and they would be able to save everything. The boy was adamant. He believed that he and Elsie were no longer connected by the prophecy. The girl could not understand whether the prince had no honor left after all. They had been together for 18 years. And now he, without thinking, abandoned her because of the prophecy, like some kind of trash. Elsie already felt humiliated, so she agreed to break off the engagement, and that was the end of their relationship, with only a month left before the wedding. The girl couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She kept thinking about how she was left completely alone. Even her faithful servant had abandoned her. Then the princess stood up, sat down at her makeup table, and looked at the crown lying on it for a long time. She thought that she would not need it anymore. Elsie heard some noise outside the door. Someone was trying very persistently to break into her room. A girl with the same pink hair as the princess burst into the room and greeted her, saying that it was an honor to meet Elsie. The stranger introduced herself as Navia Lawrence, adding that she must fulfill the prophecy. The princess froze in her tracks. She could not believe that the daughter of the Marquis Lawrence was standing in front of her. With false sincerity, Elsie replied that she was also pleased to meet him, but she had not given him permission to enter her room. Navia brazenly declared that she had come to look around, since she would now be living here. She took the crown lying on the makeup table without asking, tried it on, and broke into a smile, thinking that this crown suited her incredibly. For Elsie, this sight was unbearable. Was some stupid little brat really going to take her place? Finally, the knight appeared. He was obviously late, allowing the stranger to get into the princess's room. The guy tried to throw her out, but Navia was not going to go anywhere. She looked at Elsie with insolence, asking ironically if something was wrong. Yes, the prophecy had changed, and this room would soon become Miss Lawrence's. But until that moment came, the girl's visit was considered trespassing, and the princess wondered how she could be punished. Even this did not frighten Navia in any way. She repeated that she was probably misunderstood, but she would soon become a princess, since the prophecy spoke specifically about her. This all made Elsie lose her temper. She rudely declared that the uninvited guest was only the daughter of the Marquis, and she was still the princess. Was it really so unclear? The princess continued, reminding that she was still the prince's bride, the mistress of the citadel, and so decided His Majesty the Emperor. With a smirk, Elsie asked if it was because Navia was the daughter of an oracle that she considered herself superior to the emperor himself. The guest got angry and started shouting that this was not true at all. Elsie Pruss ordered that the girl be seized, tied hand and foot, and sent back to the Marquise. She considered it a fair punishment for Navia breaking into the princess's bedroom. The girl began to struggle, demanding to be let go, but it was useless. How stupid it was of His Majesty to replace Elsie with this stupid girl. She was simply unreasonable. The princess began to think about how she could make the emperor pay for everything he had allowed himself to do to her. Everyone around was whispering that God had turned away from Elsie. Otherwise, how could one explain the prophecy changing? People were interested in what would happen to the Pruss family now. After all, God had abandoned their precious daughter. But she was still a princess. She would probably be married to the king of another country. Elsie was angry when she heard such things. Yes, she was no longer the crown princess. But how could they say such things about her? She stepped forward, and with fury in her eyes, demanded to repeat what the girl had just said about her. The girl became so scared that they immediately began to make excuses and ask for forgiveness, promising that they would never say anything like that about the princess again. This conversation was interrupted by the maid of honor, who entered the corridor and heard screams. She asked what was going on. Elsie couldn't believe that the woman was there too. She had been with her since childhood, and now she had turned away from her. Without waiting for an answer, the princess waved her hand. She was fed up with all this and walked away. That's how it all ended. Elsie Pruss became lonelier than ever before. The girl entered the reception hall, and her gaze fell on the prince. She still could not believe that now she would only see him in the reception hall. They were no longer a family. Trying to contain her emotions, Elsie apologized for keeping His Highness waiting. She was used to seeing him every day. She took it for granted. Now it was all over, and only bright memories associated with the prince, who was everything to the girl, came to mind. Pretending that Elsie was not hurt by what had happened, she said that she had found out who would take the position of chief chamberlain in the imperial castle. The position had been inherited by the son of the former chamberlain. With a smirk, the prince assumed that the princess didn't care at all about what happened. She didn't understand what kind of reaction they were expecting from her, a protest or something. If Elsie had known that tears would help her, she would have been crying from despair long ago. However, the girl decided to keep at least the remnants of her pride. In truth, the princess came to the reception hall not only for this. She had something else to say. She wanted to know when she should leave the castle. Since His Majesty had not said anything, it was probably up to the prince to decide. The prince seemed offended by this question, and he rose from the table and walked away, only telling Elsie to do as she wished. That evening, the girl sat in her room and read the notes she was going to give to the prince when he became emperor. She felt so hurt that it was unclear why she had tried so hard. Now everything had become meaningless. 8 years ago, the princess was learning to fight, which she didn't like and was bad at, when a prince came and told her not to force herself to do what she didn't want. His Majesty, the emperor, believed that members of the imperial family should be able to stand up for themselves. The prince considered himself a good knight. He dealt with battles much better than with state affairs. The boy asked Elsie for permission to let him protect her. Taking the girl by the hand, he said that they would still go through life together, so he would always be able to protect her. The princess burned the notes she had so carefully kept, for now their paths had diverged. Opening the window, she saw a dove heading straight towards her, with a message tied to the bird's legs. As Elsie had thought, the letter was from her father, for he was the only one who addressed his letters in that way. The princess called Ash. The boy was a loyal servant of the knight's family, who was sent to the citadel without the knowledge of the duke himself. This guy was Elsie Pruss's blade. It turned out that the guy had been waiting for a long time for the princess to call him. She extended her hand to Ash, and he kissed it tenderly. The guy knew that the princess had called him for a reason, but that she needed help, and that was true. Elsie wanted Ash to spread a certain rumor, a rumor about Miss Lawrence. The Marquis of Lawrence had no money or influence other than his title. It's all because 3 generations ago, the Marquis's wife used weak people to remain beautiful. Elsie was going to play on this for a start, simply by spreading the rumor that the daughter of the Marquis of Lawrence was kidnapping poor children. That would be enough for a start. In any case, Navia was the one who started it, saying that the princess was too wasteful, manipulating the servants. All of this was childish babble. Ash was loyal to the princess. He could not allow anyone to insult Elsie. Tears appeared in the boy's eyes. The girl guessed that this was his plan to make everyone think that she decided to scold him. Everything was exactly like this. Otherwise, people could suspect something. For Ash, it was convenient that he could cry at any moment. The princess was pleased with herself, and she expected nothing less from the guy. The girl made a promise to herself that she, Elsie Pruss, would make Navia Lawrence pay for daring to stand in the way of the only princess of peasantry. His Eminence was informed that the princess of peasantry was at the center of a scandal. The stranger was not going to allow this. He wanted Elsie Pruss to be only his. Miss Lawrence, the new owner of the prophecy, was also involved in it. His Eminence had everything planned. He was going to meet with Lady Pruss. The guy was really looking forward to this meeting. The princess gathered all her things. She was going to return to her father, leaving behind everything she had received as crown princess. But she didn't know what to do with the engagement ring. Elsie rang the bell and was summoned by a maid. She had never seen this girl before. Did the prince really decide to change all the servants after the breakup? The princess gave the maid the box with the ring, ordering her to return it to the prince. Now the girl decided to choose which dresses she should get rid of. Naturally, she wanted to throw away everything that she and the prince had bought together. The maid came back, her eyes darting around as if she was afraid of something. It turned out that the prince had said that if Elsie wanted to return the ring, she should do it herself. Coming closer to the princess, the maid apologized and asked if everything was okay with her. She knew she shouldn't be asking such questions, but the girl said she was worried about Elsie. The maid had heard the terrible rumors that were circulating about the daughter of Marquis Lawrence, and she was very afraid that the girl would become the crown princess, as the new prophecy said. The princess realized that she was talking to a servant. Still not knowing her name, she decided to fix this and asked the girl's name. She introduced herself as Azel Portuba, the daughter of Viscount Portuba. Another brilliant thought flashed through Elsie's head. She knew that this girl would still be useful to her. Princess Pruss entered the prince's office. She came as he wanted. Did he really call her to mock her? She sat down at the table and saw the bouquet that she had made herself. It was a long time ago. The prince had thrown out the previous one and replaced it with a new one exactly the same. Coming up behind her, he asked Elsie if she'd come to return the ring or what. Showing the box with the ring, the princess confirmed that this is exactly what she came for. The girl said that she was told that the prince asked to return it personally, or she was mistaken. His Highness took the ring. Elsie began to get up and accidentally touched a vase of flowers with her dress. The vase fell and shattered into many pieces. The prince immediately jumped up to the girl and asked her not to move so that she would not get hurt. Elsie jumped away from the guy, saying that such behavior was unacceptable because they were no longer engaged, and he came too close to her. The prince agreed with the girl and stepped back. Elsie turned and headed for the exit, as His Highness shouted sarcastically at her back, asking if she really had so much to do. At least he thought that the girl no longer had any work. The princess also responded sarcastically that she had a lot of things to do. She needed to pack her things, since she no longer lived here, and this was not a quick process. The prince's eyes filled with rage. He approached Elsie again and asked her to repeat what she had just said. Otherwise, he would not understand what things were being discussed. In as calm a tone as possible, the princess replied that she was leaving and did not intend to stay there for a minute. The prince grabbed the princess by the hand, his eyes filled with hopelessness, and asked if he could ask her for something, if it were possible. His Highness asked the girl to sort through a mountain of documents, since she had been doing this all the time. After a couple of seconds, he realized his mistake and immediately said that nothing was needed, and that Elsie should forget what he asked her about. The girl turned around and walked out of the prince's office with her head held high. She understood perfectly well that if she left, she would not be able to return, and this made her incredibly hurt and offended. A maid entered Elsie's room, and the girl asked what her mistress would like. Azel's attention immediately fell on the lady's leg, which was covered in blood. The princess immediately reassured the maid, saying that everything was fine. She was sure that there wouldn't even be a scar left. She asked the girl to bandage her leg. At the moment when Azel was bandaging her leg, Elsie asked her if the girl could keep her ears open. She asked for more details about the rumors circulating about Miss Lawrence. Azel had only heard that the Marquis's daughter was kidnapping children from poor families. There had long been rumors that the Marquis's family liked to take baths in human blood. Elsie was happy, but didn't show it. Ash did a great job. The maid still could not believe that such a person would become the crown princess. Society believed that she was not worthy of it. The princess said that the future of the imperial family could not help but worry her, but in this situation, everything had already been decided. Elsie decided to get to know her maid better by asking if Mr. Rubella was by any chance her relative. It turned out that this was Azel's brother. The princess knew him a little, since he was the emperor's assistant. That same evening, the girl discovered a bird on her window again. Most likely, her father sent her again. But what was strange was that the sheet tied to her leg was blank. Elsie became interested in what her father was writing that was so important and secret. She brought the sheet to the candle, and the flame revealed the text. After reading the message, the girl's eyes lit up with excitement. What was written there was brilliant. Navia Lawrence spoke to the public with empty promises. The girl tried to convince everyone that her family would take care of everyone, swearing on her name and honor. Ash reported to the princess how the future crown princess was fighting rumors. Elsie was not surprised by such behavior. as if the girl had already become a princess. The girl had one more request for her faithful servant Ash. He was to deliver a letter to her father. The princess asked the duke to block the road home by any means necessary. She wanted to stay here longer to gather information about the marquis. She didn't have to wait long. The butler approached Elsie and asked for forgiveness. The man said that the trip home would have to be postponed, as there was a collapse on the road. The only road leading to the duchy was blocked. The princess was extremely surprised, because she had only just yesterday given a letter to her father asking if he could do such a thing. In the morning, the girl broke the door handle. She decided to continue her game and see what would happen next. Elsie, looking innocent, asked what was to be done about Miss Lawrence, who was to live there. Looking the butler in the eye, the princess said that Lady Navia had come to her personally and ordered her to get out of the capital. Thus, the girl hinted that such a fate could affect everyone. Elsie continued to secretly prove that the one who has not a penny behind her, the one who cannot even protect her own lands, will rule the empire. Navia Lawrence was completely supported by the temple, and she spent all the money on dresses and jewelry. Elsie had no idea that the rumors would spread so quickly. Everyone was whispering about Lady Lawrence and her unacceptable behavior. One day, a butler approached the princess, extended his hand to the girl, and promised that he would always be on her side. One word from Elsie and the man was ready to risk his life for her, believing that his son would do the same. The man still remembered the day when the princess was brought to the castle. She was such a small and fragile girl, and now she had grown up completely. Elsie was pleased with herself. She was waiting to see how Navia Lawrence would respond this time, this spoiled girl who was stepping on the same rake again. Even the emperor did not dare touch the sword, shield, and treasures of the empire. The princess was preparing for the upcoming fun. In her hands, she was holding some letter, which was clearly connected with the marquis's daughter. The next morning, Elsie was once again convinced that rumors spread incredibly quickly. But of course, to get rid of one rumor, it was necessary to start others. The girl understood that it was impossible for the temple to continue supporting this girl. As the daughter of the oracle, she received many temple privileges. Previously, high priests did not interfere in worldly affairs, but it was said that the current one was not like that. He was still on the side of Navia, and Elsie decided to lure him to her side. Miss Lawrence was not supported by the fallen family of the marquis, but by the temple. It was very difficult to resist the temple. It had the same power as the emperor. Elsie thought that if Navia continued to defame the name of the temple, then what would happen? They hardly wanted that, judging by the fact that it was already useless to fight the rumors. Everything was heading in that direction. The princess decided to somehow force the priest to act, but there was one problem. She had no idea what the priest was like. It seemed like it was time to get acquainted. The priest was practicing his sword skills when he was interrupted by the message that Princess Prusse wanted to meet him. His eyes sparkled, but the problem was that the time had not yet come, so the priest ordered to closely monitor information about him. Elsie went out for a walk in the garden with her maid. It was quite cool outside, and the girl took off her shawl and threw it over Azel. The maid felt awkward and immediately began to refuse, but the princess insisted that the girl take the shawl. Azel Portuba, elder sister of Rubel Portuba, the prince's assistant. Elsie knew very well that her maid could still be useful. To catch a fish, you had to throw in the bait and wait. Over a cup of tea, Azel's attention fell on a beautiful glass house, which only representatives of certain families were allowed to enter. The princess said that since the girl's brother was the prince's assistant, her family could not be called ordinary, so she could ask her brother to take her to this house. In fact, Azel couldn't find a home for herself, so she lives with her brother. The maids usually either go home or live at the palace, but the girl had a brother. The maid loved her brother very much. She could not even imagine life without him. Elsie was determined to make the most of this acquaintance. She said that she admired Azel, since you have lived away from your family since childhood. She asked the maid what she and her brother usually talked about, citing the fact that she had no time to talk to her own, so she was interested in others. Usually the girl talked to her brother about how the day went, or what new things happened. Sometimes they talked about work. It seemed like the fish was on the hook. Azel told him that her brother was now on a dangerous mission. The brother told his sister how difficult it was for him now, as part of the temple duties had been delegated to him. Elsie thought that the prince wanted to pretend to cooperate with the temple, even as a child. When she first became the crown princess, the temple and the empire had a very difficult relationship. The princess said that her brother would soon return from the war, but she didn't even know what to tell him. The maid volunteered to help. The girl was very sincere. Elsie was so ashamed that she wanted to get closer to her brother. She even asked Azel not to tell anyone about it, and she naively swore. The maid left. The princess sat alone and finished her tea. When the prince came in, he was not alone. Next to him was the one Elsie wanted to see the least, Navia Lawrence. Looking the princess insolently in the eyes, the Marquis's daughter asked what she was doing there. Lady Pruss reminded that she had already told her that she needed to be treated politely, and since the Marquis's daughter had not understood this the first time, it was worth explaining it to her again. Looking at the prince, Elsie asked if he was against it, but His Highness remained silent. It seemed that the new crown princess did not even know the basic rules of etiquette that even a 3-year-old knew. She was not allowed to talk to the princess without asking her permission. Navia didn't understand whether they still considered her just the daughter of a marquis. Elsie was no longer the crown princess, but they still treated her well. The princess could not understand. The marquis's daughter really did not see the difference between them. If only because she is the daughter of the Duke of Prusse, she is worthy of such treatment. Elsie threatened that if she heard another word from Navia, she would again order her to be tied up and taken away from here. Even this did not frighten the impudent girl at all. She replied that the princess would regret it. She should have been more polite with the new crown princess. What the prince was thinking at that moment was unclear. The guy just stood there, looked at it all, and was silent. Navia flew up to His Highness, took him by the arm, and demonstratively, as loudly as possible, said that it was time for them to go. Elsie stood and analyzed the psychology of the newly minted crown princess. She was somehow too calm, if you felt her temperament, just once. Having felt herself above the princess, she would immediately try to destroy her. The prince abruptly removed his hand from under Lady Lawrence's arm, and the princess and the Marquis's daughter froze in surprise. With a hint of rudeness in his voice, His Highness ordered the girl to go without him. With a displeased face, as if humiliated, Navia Lawrence left. The prince sat down at the table next to Elsie, but all his actions were performed in absolute silence. The girl was the first to speak, asking if he wanted to talk about anything. His Highness stood up abruptly, came closer to Elsie, and said that he had learned that the princess had been doing some very interesting things lately. The girl did not understand what exactly the prince meant. Was he really talking about her spreading rumors about the Marquis's daughter? His Highness's eyes were filled with anger, and he asked with a rude voice to stop all this immediately. He didn't explain to Elsie that she should stop, believing that the girl understood everything perfectly well herself. From his lips, it sounded not like a request, but like an order. Taking the princess gently by the chin, the prince said that this was all for her own good, since he only wished the best for her. Elsie abruptly pushed the boy's hand away, saying that he could warn her as much as he wanted. She once loved him madly. She loved him because he called her by name, for holding hands with her. Now that it was all in the past, Elsie told the prince that he himself knew perfectly well that the Prusse family would not allow those who went against them to live in peace. The girl simply followed the rules of her family. Getting up from the table, she asked His Highness to never call her by her name again. Now she was simply Princess Prusse to him. Walking alone through the garden, the girl discovered that someone was watching her, as if waiting for her to enter a deserted place. This impudent girl had no lack of courage. Elsie knew perfectly well that she would do this. Navia began to smile falsely, saying that she would like to discuss something with the princess. The Marquis's daughter had heard that there had been various rumors circulating about her lately, and she knew perfectly well that they were being spread by Elsie. The princess reminded that she was not the first to start this war. Navia suddenly laughed loudly. It turned out, if you believe her words, that it was not she who spread the rumors about Lady Prusse, but who it was, she does not know. Elsie opened a small bottle she was holding in her hands, intending to show something to the Marquis's daughter. A drop from the bottle fell on the grass. The grass burned in an instant. The girl said that if someone else were chasing her, she would not hesitate to pour this on him. So if Lady Lawrence wants to discuss something, it would be best for her to write a letter to the princess. Navia pointedly placed her left hand over her face and threatened Elsie that she had better not get her mad. The girl noticed a ring on the left hand of the Marquis's daughter, the very ring that she had recently returned to the prince. The ground seemed to have slipped out from under the princess's feet. She thought that nothing could hurt her so much, but this act of the prince simply destroyed her. Navia was delighted that Elsie noticed her ring, which the prince had given her. The princess smirked, saying that she didn't think the future crown princess liked hand-me-downs. The girl began to justify herself by saying that she was wearing this ring temporarily while they were making another one for her. Lady Prusse tried not to lose her composure and pride. She told her interlocutor that if she had nothing more to say, then she could go, thereby humiliating her. When Navia left, Elsie called Ash, who was nearby the whole time, to save the princess if anything happened. It was clear from the guy that he was very worried about the lady, but she was fine, except for the fact that she barely restrained herself from finishing off the Marquis's daughter. Ash had a letter for the girl that he was going to give her. The letter said that the war was over and the soldiers would return this week. 3 years ago, the Kingdom of Sepia asked the Empire to send an army to help them. In exchange, they agreed to become vassals of the Empire. Rias Prus, Elsie's brother, also went to war. The Empire managed to win almost without losses, and it was unclear from the princess's face whether she was happy or upset about her brother's imminent return. Her eyes darted around slyly, and she decided to turn the situation to her advantage, deciding that it could play into her hands. Elsie Prus couldn't sleep for a long time. The soldiers would arrive tomorrow. She needed to get at least a little sleep, but there was no sleep in either eye. Having closed her eyes for literally a second, the girl woke up and discovered a huge number of flowers in her bed. The Prus family had a strong focus on medicine, including poisons, so if these flowers are poisonous, it won't be easy to poison Elsie. Alfredo Venezia, the second prince, entered the lady's room with a bouquet of roses. It turned out that all those flowers that were in Elsie's bed were brought by the second prince. The princess still couldn't come to her senses. She didn't understand why Alfredo had come to her at all, and whether he should return tomorrow. This question surprised the prince quite a bit. He thought that he didn't need a reason to meet the princess. He just wanted to see her. The guy ran as fast as he could to the citadel, and it turned out that he was very worried when he found out that the prophecy had changed. Alfredo was the prince's only brother, the illegitimate son of the emperor. Elsie noticed that over the past 3 years, the boy had grown a lot. He no longer looked like the little boy who stood before her eyes. The guy suddenly rushed to hug the princess, and it was clear from her face that she did not expect this. Alfredo looked at the princess with his sad eyes, as if asking if she didn't remember anything. Ever since then, the second prince always followed Lady Prus around like a little tail. The girl was sincerely proud that Alfredo was able to return from the war to which the queen sent him, safe and sound. He was so lonely, 3 whole years without Princess Elsie Prus. When the boy turned 13, the princess allowed him to enter her room without permission. He thought that the agreement was still in force, so he came. The most important thing is that no one sees Alfredo. Otherwise, there will be no end to problems. Even though Elsie broke up with the crown prince, she didn't need any extra rumors. The second prince's eyes were filled with hope that the princess and his brother had truly separated. Lady Prus confirmed that this was indeed the case. Alfredo walked up to his little sister, kissed her hand, and asked if she would like to have breakfast with him. The girl, without thinking for a second, immediately refused. She understood perfectly well that it was impossible, since the guy had not even greeted him and Her Majesty yet. Elsie consoled her brother, as they could spend time later, but now it was time for him to go. Despite his emerging masculine features, the princess realized that Alfredo had not changed at all in these 3 years. Looking out the window, Elsie noticed that everyone was bustling about. The servants were preparing for a feast for the knights. She wondered what if the former crown princess, who had broken off the engagement, came to such a banquet. How would the prince react to this? Princess Prus was sitting in her office. There was no work. When a maid entered the office, the girl brought a letter for the mistress. As she expected, her brother returned to the mansion. After all, he was the heir, and a lot of work had accumulated for him over the past 3 years. Elsie ordered Azel to prepare her for the banquet. The girl froze in place. She did not understand what exactly her mistress meant. She was not going to go there. Tears came to Elsie's eyes, and the maid immediately rushed to her to console her and find out what had happened. Princess Prus was a good actress. The girl said that she simply remembered something that happened 2 days ago. Azel assured that the gentleman could trust her with everything, and that she would do everything to help in any situation. Elsie agreed to tell, but asked not to tell anyone else, as it could harm Lady Lawrence's reputation. That same evening, the princess sat and thought about how she could destroy Nevia. Even if her debt became even greater, nothing would change. Ash knocked on the door of the office, and the guy found out everything Elsie asked him about. He brought to her all the information he had found about the Marquis's family. Among this information was information about where the Marquis got his money. The Marquis was given money by the Merchant Guild, and it was said that the son of the guild leader was in love with Miss Lawrence. All this did not sound very convincing. Elsie knew that there was another reason for borrowing such a large amount of money. It turned out that the son of the guild leader killed his mother, and his father still doesn't know the truth. This was more like the truth, so in that case it was better to pay for silence. It turned out that this is not all, but there is something more important. The temple also lends money to the Marquis, And the matter was far from the fact that Nevaeh was made a child of prophecy. It turns out that this was the case even before the prophecy changed. It was this priest who announced the new prophecy. There were rumors that this priest was having a secret affair with Miss Lawrence. It all seemed very strange. Priests were forbidden to have relationships. For those who serve God in the temple, relationships were a strict taboo. Elsie asked Ash to find out something else for her, what Navia's weakness was, but the boy had heard rumors that the girl's weakness was her beauty. Fancy dresses, collections of jewelry, beautiful servants. The princess had heard about it too. Miss Prouse came up with the brilliant idea of Ash seducing the Marquis's daughter. The guy was ready to do anything for the lady, even this. He asked to arrange one meeting for him with the future crown princess, and everything would be done. Ash was a dagger that a father gave to his beloved daughter Elsie. The boy grew up in a guild. He was trained to become an assassin. It was unknown how it happened, but Ash was left completely alone. Then the Duke found him and took him with him, and from then on the boy began to live with them. For Elsie's father and her family, Ash will do anything, literally anything. One day, His Highness gave the princess a day off. She was not going to waste a minute. She wanted to read longer. The girl heard some noise. She entered the room. Ash was standing there with a sword and covered in blood. The boy asked Elsie to return to her room immediately. On the floor, the princess noticed a man who was barely alive. She was not going to go anywhere and demanded an explanation. Elsie heard the man begging for mercy. Someone scared her from behind. It was her brother, who approached very quietly. The princess's brother was also covered in blood. He picked Elsie up, intending to carry her to her room. The girl had already seen enough that she should not have seen it all. Children should be sleeping at such a time. But since the princess was very curious and would not have fallen asleep if she had seen such a thing, her brother decided to explain everything to her. He kissed his sister tenderly on the forehead, saying that he would answer all her questions, but later, and that she needed to sleep at night. The servants did not react to what had happened, and then Elsie realized that everyone knew, everyone except her. Later, the princess finally learned the truth. That day her brother and Ash were dealing with the assassins sent to her, the girl from the prophecy. Because of Elsie, many servants were hurt or even killed. Her family suffered a lot, and she, as a child, had to go through it. In the garden, the girl was met by a crowd of people in hoods and with daggers. For some reason she found this funny. She asked if they had come on Miss Lawrence's orders. She had noticed for a long time that she was being followed, so now was the time to sort it all out. Ash appeared out of nowhere. Miss Prouse gave the order to deal with the opponents. After a few minutes, the hooded strangers were all defeated. The princess's dagger dealt with them all alone. It was an amazing sight. Ash dropped one knee to Lady Prouse and apologized for making her see all of this. The girl thought he had nothing to apologize for, and she thoughtfully handed him a towel so he could wipe the blood from his face. Ash left one of the attackers alive to interrogate him and find out who hired them, but Elsie was sure that it was the work of the Marquis's daughter. The princess had no intention of delivering the prisoner to the Duke's estate to formally announce the accusation. She wanted to keep everything secret. Her decision was only made because these attackers were sent by Nevaeh. No one else would have dared to carry out an attack in broad daylight in the palace. Until Elsie understood how Lady Lawrence was connected to the temple, she did not want to contact her, but she still ordered the survivor to be delivered to her father at the estate. That evening, the princess received another letter from her father. The Duke wrote that it would be quite difficult to find who was behind the Assassin's Guild. There was a knock on Elsie's office. It was Alfredo. The guy came in with a smile on his face and the words about how long it had been since they had seen each other. He came to give something to the girl. In the hands of the second prince was a gorgeous white dress. This dress belonged to the princess. She was supposed to wear it at the wedding. The princess couldn't figure out why Alfredo had brought her this dress, but it turned out that some marchioness wanted to steal it. The guy arrived in time and did not allow the impudent woman to do this. But still, he was outraged by such an act. How she dared to do this at all. Elsie revealed that Miss Lawrence was the new child of the prophecy. It turned out that Alfredo went to get a gift for the princess and met a girl with pink hair and decided to follow her to the bar. This story really interested the girl. She couldn't wait to find out the details. In the bar, the prince heard a girl with pink hair repeating Elsie's name over and over, repeating the name and looking at the dress. The guy felt sick that the princess's name was mentioned in such a place. He wanted to beat them all up. In the end, Alfredo decided not to waste his energy, so he simply grabbed the dress and left. A white dress. You can't wear it anywhere except for a wedding, Elsie thought. The princess remembered the prince's words that the most exceptional color is white, since no color stands out like white. White is able to add sophistication to anything, which is why it is the most exclusive. The prince had seen many dresses, but this one, in his opinion, was the most beautiful, and he thought it would look gorgeous on Elsie, even without useless accessories. Remembering the past again, the princess told Alfredo that she did not need this dress. For her, this dress was a reward for dedicating her entire life to the Prince of the Empire, but she no longer needed it. Elsie was now the Princess of Peasantry, not the Crown Princess. The girl asked Alfredo to return the dress back to Miss Lawrence, as she had no use for it. Elsie's sad eyes gave her away. The second prince approached her, gently took her face, and asked what had happened to her. He knew that the girl always had that expression on her face when she was sad. After finishing the conversation, the princess said that she was a little busy now, and it would be better to talk a little later, and besides, the guy came without warning. The day after tomorrow, there will be a banquet in honor of the knights who returned from the war. Everyone was talking about the fact that God left Elsie, wondering who the princess will be with now. Everyone was probably wondering if she would show up at the banquet, since the collapse left her stuck in the palace. Someone said that the girl would not come because of the prince or Miss Lawrence. Others, on the contrary, believed that Elsie would come and make a scene because she could not let the prince go. They all wanted one thing, for Elsie Pruss to come, and everyone was interested in what would happen. Some thought that the princess would burst into tears when she saw the prince and the marquis's daughter together. Others thought that she would make a scandal. Elsie decided to give them what they wanted, scandal and tears, and maybe even fainting from shame. But all this did not mean that she would do it. The princess called Azel into her office to share her plan. The maid cried out with joy that of course she would help her mistress. Miss Lawrence would not dare to touch the princess with a finger. Now Elsie faced another task to implement her plan. Where would she be without secondary roles? She needed to find a couple for the banquet. The butler brought more letters, which were for Miss Pruss. The princess asked to throw away all the letters that came to her without even opening them, but to send the letter that she wrote. Elsie also gave instructions to throw away all the letters without even bringing them to her, which would contain proposals to make a couple at the banquet. The girl had already decided who she would go with. Returning to her room after midnight, the princess was pleased with herself. Everything she had done to Miss Lawrence up until then had been childish pranks. An incredible surprise awaited the future crown princess at the banquet. The next morning, preparations for the banquet were in full swing. If the banquet takes place in the palace, then Elsie won't have to do anything special. She won't have to starve herself or stuff her clothes with cotton. The princess simply had to prepare a performance. Behind the barn, the girl overheard the conversation of the marquis's daughter as she scolded the guy. This poor man ended up with her brooch. Elsie watched this with a smile. Where could he have gotten the brooch? Of course she gave it to him. One day, Navia dropped her brooch on Elsie, who picked it up not knowing what to do with it, but she knew that it would come in handy. One day, the princess had a plan. She told Ash about it and gave him this brooch. The guy promised to do everything in his power. Ash shared his discovery with everyone. As soon as the rumors reached Navia, she personally came to deal with the pathetic servant who dared to rob her. Ash's eyes filled with tears. The boy began to swear that he found the brooch in the grass, that he would never steal it from Miss Lawrence. The girl felt sorry for the guy. Princess Elsie was pleased with herself. The job was done. Arriving home from the war, Elsie's brother headed straight for the shower. Before the guy had time to relax, he was informed that a letter had arrived from his sister. After reading the letter, Rias immediately ordered the horse to be prepared. He was going to leave for the capital at nightfall. His Eminence was preparing for the meeting he had planned for today. Finally, the day came, the day of his meeting with Princess Elsie Pruss. The time to put the plan into action had also come. The princess was a little worried, but was more confident than ever. After the prophecy changed, all the servants turned away from Elsie. Apparently, this prophecy was really that important to them. The butler told the girl the latest rumors that the prince and Miss Lawrence were heading to the hall right now. The man asked when the princess's companion would arrive, and she replied that when the sun set and the moon rose. No one knew, including Azel, who the princess was waiting for at nightfall. Everyone around was whispering whether Elsie's companion would definitely arrive. It was already very late, and the guy was still nowhere to be seen. The girl assured the ladies that he would definitely come, and if they were so worried, then they should take a walk together. Before the ladies had time to leave the palace, the door opened, and an incredibly handsome guy, Prince Rias, Elsie's brother, appeared from it. He walked up and kissed his little sister on the cheek. She had changed a lot since their last meeting. Of course, she was only 15 years old then. The prince extended his hand to Elsie, and this incredibly beautiful couple entered the throne room. Let the unforgettable banquet begin. The Marquis's daughter stood surrounded by those present, discussing what wonderful desserts were served at the table today. But unfortunately, she cannot try anything, since her corset was tightened very tightly. All attention evaporated from Navia, and everyone began to vigorously discuss the fact that Lady Pruss would be attending the banquet with her brother. Just a couple of minutes ago, everyone in the room was chatting enthusiastically, but now there was deathly silence. It was easy to understand those gathered. After all, Elsie was the crown princess and almost never appeared at banquets. Moreover, next to the girl was the one who had spent the last 3 years at war, Rias Prus. Rias Prus, the whole empire knew that name. From childhood he attracted attention, not only because he was the heir of the duke, but also because he inherited his mother's beauty. The boy began learning fencing at a very young age and gradually honed his skills. Over time, he reached such heights that when he turned 16, His Majesty the Emperor gave Rias a sword. The prince would not have been so admired if he could only swing a sword. Elsie's brother was not like that. The boy was talented in his studies. Rias not only helped her father with paperwork, but also participated in the management of the duchy. When he turned 20, he volunteered for the war. The guy was not going to just sit back and profit from someone else's glory. He was not like that. Elsie's brother slew so many enemies on the front lines that he was even granted a title in the Kingdom of Sepia. After hearing that Rias was going to war, many girls began writing him letters of complaint. The princess found it amusing to watch how those around her were whispering, but were afraid to approach. Elsie looked into her brother's eyes. She did not tell him what she had planned, but she was curious what the prince knew. The princess moved away from her brother to get herself a glass of wine. The plan was put into action. Miss Lawrence was brought a glass of wine. Supposedly a gentleman, struck by her beauty, asked to pass her a glass of wine. The Marquis's daughter laughed sarcastically. She was already impatiently waiting for the first dance to be announced. She decided to drink a glass of this wine anyway. Elsie knew that she would like it. A magnificent wine, sweet and easy to drink, although strong. The girl would not even notice that something had been added to it. If Navia drinks the whole glass, then everything will go exactly according to plan. Elsie's brother suspected something was wrong and asked his sister if there was just wine in the glass or something else. Smiling, the princess replied that there was wine and a little bit of potion. Lady Pruss ordered this potion from her father. At first she wanted to mix it herself, but the recipe turned out to be too complicated. It seemed to be starting to work, and it was time to move on to the other part of the plan. The princess approached Navia and said that she was the one who spread all these rumors about her. The girl laughed out loud. She clearly didn't care. It seemed that Elsie's plan was not going as she wanted, because this impudent girl had to lose her temper. With a malicious glee in her face, Miss Lawrence said that the princess could do whatever she liked, but as soon as she became crown princess, that very hour she would bring her to her knees. Elsie thought for a second. After all, the plan went as it should. She succeeded. Now everyone will definitely understand who the main character is here. That day, Elsie entered the banquet hall for the first time on the prince's arm. The emperor and empress always danced first. Afterwards, in order of seniority, the prince and princess danced. They always danced before the others. Elsie didn't care about these memories. She just always went towards this position in society. The princess wasn't going to let some slut ruin everything. Lady Pruss decided that from now on, everything would be her way. Miss Lawrence would never dance first at a banquet again. Putting on an innocent face, Elsie asked the Marquis's daughter to calm down. Otherwise, she might fall. Through her teeth, Navia gritted out that the princess would regret everything. She would not allow anyone to treat her like that. The atmosphere in the banquet hall clearly changed. Elsie began to calm the girl down, saying that she did not understand what she was talking about. Those present did not take their eyes off this scene. Navia simply lost her temper. She pushed the princess away and screamed at the whole hall for her to get away from her. Lady Pruss wondered. The Marquis's daughter was too calm for someone who had been drugged. Could this really be her true face? Navia approached Elsie and angrily asked if she knew him. The girl did not understand who they were talking about. She wanted to take Miss Lawrence aside and ask her more details, but now everyone was looking at them. The princess took the future crown princess by the shoulder to lead her to her room when she sharply pushed her away again. Everyone around started whispering that such behavior was unacceptable. A lady should not behave like that. Those around her were surprised why God chose this particular girl. Then Azel entered the game. She approached Navia and began to shout loudly. How dare she treat the princess like that, because their princess is the kindest. Elsie's maid angered Miss Lawrence. She suddenly grabbed the girl's neck ornament and began to tear it apart. Azel begged him to stop. She screamed that God could not have chosen her. that she would never become crown princess, since only Elsie was worthy of that. Navia swung her arm and hit the maid in the face with all her might, calling her a dirty commoner. The princess's plan was successful. Miss Lawrence played her part perfectly. Lady Pross asked that all this be stopped immediately. Azel got into character perfectly. She began to address those present, asking them to look closely at Nevia. If she really were a child of prophecy, she would beat an innocent person. The Marquis's daughter thought one blow was not enough. She swung again, but Elsie managed to stand in front of her maid, thereby protecting her, but receiving wounds on her face. Those present opened their mouths in horror. How could the child of prophecy hit someone and even maim them? It seems that Navia began to come to her senses. The potion only worked for a short period of time. Now the veil has fallen. Lady Lawrence realized what she had just done, and those around her were whispering that the oracle must have been wrong. He couldn't have chosen such a girl as the crown princess. Looking into Navia's eyes, Elsie publicly stated that she had doubted the new prophecy from the beginning. But if the prophecy was true, would this girl be able to bring peace and tranquility to the empire? Everyone around was whispering that the Marquise of Navia was really not like them. Elsie walked up to the girl, took her hand, and whispered if she had heard the latest rumors about people not believing that God had chosen her. At that moment, the princess let go of the potential crown princess's hand, and the girl began to fall straight into the mountain of glasses standing behind her. The prince's hand grabbed Elsie by the shoulders. The girl clearly did not expect this. The princess could not understand why His Highness did not help Navia, why he chose her. Thanks to the prince, Elsie was unharmed, but the same could not be said for Miss Lawrence, who sat surrounded by shards of glass. Miss Pross could not understand what His Highness had in mind. Tears flowed like a river from Navia's eyes. She couldn't believe what had happened. This couldn't be. Elsie walked up to her, held out her hand, and asked if Lady Lawrence was hurt. Almost silently, the Marquis's daughter whispered someone's name. This made the princess wonder if it was a name after all. Then this was the first time the girl had heard it. Collecting her thoughts, Lady Lawrence vowed that she would not let this go. Elsie only told the girl that she didn't care that she was a child of prophecy. Such behavior was unacceptable. Everyone around was whispering that the princess was right. How could some marchioness dare to raise her hand against the princess? That she would not be able to cope with the role of crown princess? That the oracle was wrong? With tears in her eyes, Navia turned to Elsie and said through clenched teeth that she was asking for punishment. The princess believed that there was no reason to punish her, and she asked her interlocutor ironically if she really thought that God had chosen her. Miss Lawrence, lowering her head, remained silent. Now everything fell into place. In this situation, something was clearly not right. That was enough for today. The princess had to wait for the girl to make a response. Elsie thought that at least in this situation the prince would help Navia, but no, something was happening between these two, and something clearly not good. The princess's brother came up to her, and seeing the blood, he began to wipe it away, checking to see if his little sister had been hurt too much. The conversation between brother and sister was interrupted by Azel, who approached. The girl was worried about her mistress. Elsie couldn't take her eyes off her maid's brother. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, of course. He was the prince's assistant. And after the engagement was broken, they didn't really see each other. The boy greeted the girl as Her Highness, and the princess noticed that he still addressed her as Crown Princess. His attitude towards her did not change at all. Rubel Portuba was the prince's assistant. Among all the prince's assistants, the guy was considered the kindest. He was good, but too emotional, which led to certain difficulties in work. Therefore, it was not possible for him to become one of Rubel's closest assistants, although Elsie knew little about him since she had never worked with him. She and Azel were very similar, both simple-minded and kind. The princess approached the maid and asked why she interfered. It turned out that it was not planned. Elsie was very grateful to the girl for trying to save her, but she didn't want Azel to get hurt because of her. Miss Pross was very sincere now. She was truly worried about the girl. The princess turned to Sir Rubel, saying that he and his sister would have to go home early and be sure to treat the wound, asking the doctor for medicine. Lady Pross returned to the banquet hall. The ladies immediately pounced on her with questions about how she was feeling now. The girls assured her that the scoundrel would receive the punishment she deserved. Elsie hoped that it would be the prince, not the emperor, who would take action against Navia. She wondered if he would punish her after all. The girls noticed that His Highness had been so sad lately, probably because of the prophecy that separated him from Elsie. It turned out that the ladies thought that Miss Pross did not leave the palace precisely because of the prince. The couple was often seen together, which is why rumors began to circulate that they were madly in love with each other and no prophecy could stop them. The princess had known for a long time that they were saying something about her and the prince, but she didn't know what exactly. The girl really loved him. Now she wondered whether the prince had ever loved her at all, or whether he had at least had feelings of sympathy for her. Although, it didn't matter anymore, since the girl believed that she no longer felt anything for the prince. The only thing is, she couldn't understand why His Highness was always nearby. Duke Rius called out to His Highness, thus distracting the prince from Miss Prusse. The girl was glad that her brother had arrived in time. He and the prince got along well, and now at least she wouldn't have to be alone with him. Elsie's brother was 3 years older than the prince. Previously, this age difference was felt very strongly. The prince could never defeat Rius. The boy was so good with the sword that the emperor gave him a standing ovation. At that time, His Majesty asked Rius to become his son's sparring partner. Lady Prusse's brother told the prince that the emperor was very sad that he could not meet his son. I wonder why Rius was trying so hard to hide Elsie from the prince, even though she was wearing heels. But because of his back, the girl couldn't see His Highness at all. There was no way to avoid a conversation. The princess knew that the prince wanted to talk to her alone. The girl noticed the prince's image, the hairstyle that he wears only at banquets, and the suit. How could she not have noticed it right away? He was wearing the suit that Elsie had given him. The prince never appeared in public wearing the same outfit twice. It was not like him. By the way, today was His Highness's first public appearance with Navia. The guy spoke first, asking the princess to talk to him. He was glad that it was a request and not an order. The prince clearly knew how to use the advantages of his position, because even if it were an order, the girl would not have the right to refuse. Elsie warned the prince that if he wanted to talk to her, he should make an official request. She always ran to him at the first call. The princess and the prince hardly spent time together, so when the opportunity arose, she ran to him as fast as she could. These words angered His Highness. He asked again if he understood correctly. In order to talk to Elsie now, he would have to make an official request every time. The guy had already warned Miss Prusse about her antics, but he didn't like at all that she didn't listen to him and did everything her own way. The girl intercepted the prince's hand and repeated that she had already said everything, that she would never forgive Lady Lawrence for the insults she had inflicted on her. His Highness could have already remembered. Because the girl is Lady Prusse, she will never forgive such treatment of her. Lady Lawrence had behaved like a child, and if the prince did not want to see that happen, he should deal with her personally. The guy remained silent, but after a few seconds, he abruptly took Elsie's hand and kissed it. The girl was extremely surprised by such behavior. She sharply pulled her hand back and said that she hoped that this would not happen again. Elsie Prusse turned around and walked away. She thought that the prince had done it in vain. His behavior was inexplicable to her. It seems the guy never changed, but the princess herself changed. She really hoped that someday her heart would stop beating so wildly when she thought about or saw the prince. Since the prince and Navia were not there, the first dance had to be between the princess and her brother. Of course, Navia was not finished yet. But so far, everything was going according to plan. Elsie was very tired after the day. She thought to go to her room and lie down. Anyway, the banquet would last all night. The princess's peace was disturbed by Ash, who suddenly approached her. The guy had urgent news. Elsie asked the guy to keep an eye on Navia when she was alone. Ash approached her and tired of comforting her, and then the potential crown princess tried to drag the guy into bed. Of course, nothing happened between them. Miss Lawrence simply passed out because of the potion, but the fact remained a fact. The princess began to worry that Ash had given the girl a potion that her father had given her. Since the Marquis's daughter could have overdosed on it, this liquid had been bought on the black market, and nothing was known about it. Elsie was very afraid to hear the news that Navia Lawrence had died. It was possible to breathe out. The girl was simply unconscious. Ash examined her. Everything was fine. In that case, the princess did not understand why the guy came to her so urgently, but it turned out that he wanted to tell her about the priest, about whom he had already reported. Before Ash could say anything, someone interrupted their privacy. Elsie was going to distract the intruder, since Ash was larger than her, and it would definitely not be possible to hide him. This uninvited guest turned out to be the second prince, Alfredo. The princess asked him what he was doing there, but the guy did not answer the question, as his gaze was drawn to Ash behind the girl's back. Elsie pretended not to hear his question, and asked how he got there, since she had locked the door. Alfredo had no intention of breaking in, but only members of the imperial family were allowed on the terrace. Elsie always came here to take a breather. She completely forgot that the passage was already closed to her. The girl realized that she had just put herself and Ash in danger. If she hadn't forgotten, she would never have come here. The princess thought that Alfredo had forgotten about the guy behind her back, but no such luck. He still wanted to know who this stranger was. Gently placing her hand on the second prince's cheek, Elsie asked if he would like to have tea with her tomorrow. The guy removed the princess's hand. The girl asked if this meant that he didn't want it. Alfredo didn't just want it. Deep down he dreamed about it, so he agreed. Miss Pruss said that she would prepare everything and be waiting for him. With a smile on his face, the prince turned around and walked towards the exit, saying that his brother would not come in here. Elsie was going to continue the discussion where they had left off regarding Navia and the priest. Someone was watching the princess and Ash from behind the bushes. The priest hoped that everything was going according to plan. He had waited too long for this day. Finally, they would meet. After listening to Ash, Lady Pruss returned to the banquet hall and immediately came to her brother to tell him the new news. It turned out that the high priest had come to see Lady Lawrence. Everything would seem logical. Navia is the new child of the prophecy, so the priest came to her. It turned out that they were not just sitting and talking, but hugging and kissing. Ash was sitting in the closet at that moment and saw everything, in which case the situation takes a different turn. Lady Lawrence was drugged, so she shouldn't have remembered Ash. The high priest was forbidden to love. He took an oath to God. He was not allowed to marry. He was not allowed to have children. Even a kiss was considered a grave sin for him. It was blasphemy. For a second, Elsie's brother froze. The boy thought about how his sister had grown in the 3 years since he left. She was still just a baby. The girl was old enough to marry the crown prince. Brother came up and kissed his little sister on the cheek. For some reason, everyone, mom, dad, brother, always kissed Elsie on the cheek. Rias was worried about his sister, whether she was very upset about the prophecy, but the girl reassured him that everything was fine and she was not worried. She was worried about something else. As the crown princess, she looked down on her father, but now she didn't know how to behave with him. The brother reassured his sister, saying that she should behave with her father as usual. They always considered her superior to them anyway. No one from peasantry could compare with Elsie. The princess's mother always said that the emperor stole their most precious treasure. The girl saw her family only a couple of times a year, but they were still always glad to see her. Others considered the Pruss family to be cruel, cold-blooded, and arrogant. They were always kind to each other. Elsie was going to return home soon, and this is what she asked to tell her parents. Their treasure was going to turn everything upside down here and immediately return. Looking at the clock, Rias noticed that it was almost midnight, and it was time for his sister to go home. Looking with eyes full of hope that her brother would go with her, the girl asked him about it. The brother, of course, was not going to let his sister go alone. He was also going to go with her. Looking at the crowd of angry ladies who were clearly not happy about their potential beau leaving, Elsie suggested that her brother stay longer if he wanted. His answer was negative. It turns out that Rias also had something to tell the princess. The conversation was about that priest. The guy didn't expect that he had such a close relationship with Navia. The girl was undoubtedly beautiful, but she had neither power nor intelligence nor talent, and yet the high priest decided to break his oath for her sake. And the age difference between them was not small. Rias was about to report this to the temple as soon as possible, but Elsie stopped him because they would start denying everything and they would achieve nothing. They needed proof, irrefutable proof. Surely this couple had been carefully hiding, leaving no trace behind them. Rias decided to fabricate evidence, but to do so he needed a sample of the priest's handwriting. Elsie reminded that the prophecy could be false. She only hinted at it, and Lady Navia already turned pale. The new prophecy was announced by the high priest. Something was not right about it, since prophecies are usually received by the eyes of the church or a few chosen priests. The princess said that the prophecy changed exactly when the head of the church changed. The prince suggested forging the handwriting and leaving a note in which the priest would confess his sins, and then kill him and make it look like suicide. In the note, the priest will talk about his relationship with Lady Naivia and that the prophecy is actually false. Allegedly, he was pushed to take this step by the time of guilt for going against God's will. If they killed the priest, then everything would end. But Elsie knew that this could not be done, since whoever killed the priest would face divine punishment. The princess asked her brother to write just a couple of letters in his handwriting. That was enough for her. Rias agreed with her sister. A servant approached the Pruss and asked Rias to follow him immediately, as something had happened. The guy didn't want to decide anything now, but they couldn't figure it out without him. Elsie wasn't too upset. She still wanted to walk alone. So much had happened today that there was not a single guard in the garden, which the princess really liked. Someone very quietly crept up behind the girl. The stranger put a rag to her mouth and whispered that she should follow him. According to the unknown person, the princess had to wait just a minute, since someone important wanted to meet with her. Without thinking twice, Elsie stepped on her opponent's foot with all her might with her heel, and his arms weakened from the intense pain. In a second, the stranger realized that the girl was about to run away, so he grabbed her by the hair, thereby preventing her from hiding. Elsie had in her hands that very bottle of potion, a drop of which burned everything. She poured the whole bottle on the stranger. While he was screaming in pain, she grabbed his dagger and cut his throat. The attacker was wheezing in pain. Blood was gushing from his wound. He had only seconds left to live. The princess demanded to know who he was and who this important person was. Another unknown man in a robe approached her, saying that she needed him, and if she threw the dagger, she would explain everything to her. Elsie had no intention of throwing the dagger, and the stranger had no other choice. First of all, he put his hand to the wound that the princess had just inflicted. The wound healed instantly, and the girl immediately noticed the white hair. The stranger looked at her and said he was glad to meet him, introducing himself as Azriel. But that name meant nothing to Elsie. Taking off his hood, the head of the temple appeared before the girl. Could it really be him? The white hair that only those with divine powers wore, the blue eyes, the pale skin, the red lips, the head of the temple that even the emperor had to reckon with, the high priest Azriel. The priest treated Elsie rudely, so she was not going to crucify herself in front of him. The princess asked what he was doing there. According to his words, Azriel came specifically to meet Lady Prusse. The priest came close to the princess, brushed her disheveled hair, stroked her pale face, and asked if she was still scared. Removing his hand, Elsie asked with a serious face, "He didn't just come to chat, that's how it was." The priest came to discuss something. No one knew anything about the head of the church, whether he was a man or a woman, how old he was, what kind of eyes he had. The princess could not even imagine that she would meet him under such circumstances. Azriel suggested that they go somewhere else to talk, as this place wasn't the best for discussion. The princess was not going to go anywhere until she received an explanation. She wanted to know why the priest tried to kidnap her. The head of the church laughed, saying that perhaps it was because he wanted to get to know the girl better and wanted to do it as quietly as possible. But she turned out to be stronger than expected. He thought that it would be easy to kidnap a princess who had spent her entire life in the palace. Looking around, Elsie realized that there was no one around, or rather, there was no one at all who could resist the priest. If even one hair fell from the priest's head because of her, such torment would await her. Words cannot describe it. If the princess showed weakness, she would become his victim, and the head of the church had no weaknesses at all. If he captured her, she would not be able to do anything at all. The main thing now was to calm down. Miss Prusse did not understand what he was talking about at all, because if he wanted to meet, he could have simply sent an invitation, and she would have responded to it. It turned out that Azriel wanted to do without formalities. Elsie interrupted him, and repeated that if he had something to say, then let him say it now. The girl tried to look the priest straight in the eyes, since it was impossible to look away. The sensations were completely different from when she looked into the prince's eyes. The priest seemed to condemn her with his gaze. Almost unnoticed, Azriel pulled out the sword that had wounded his servant, pointing it at Elsie. He asked if she would be his, if she really was a prophecy diva. Then there was no point in denying it. The princess apologized, saying that the prophecy had changed a month ago, and the new prophecy did not speak about her. The priest laughed again. Looking into the girl's eyes, he asked if he really believed it. It was very easy to get hurt with such a dagger. Just one wrong move, and that's it. Elsie couldn't believe that Azriel handled it so deftly. She was very interested in where and under what circumstances he learned this. Of course, she had heard that the new head of the church was different from the previous ones. The princess said that she believed, but only at first. But her opinion changed, and she had something to tell. She knew that this information would please the high priest. The head of the church assumed that the girl wanted something in return. His guess was correct. Elsie wanted information of equal importance. True, it was already late, so Azriel said goodbye to the girl until the next meeting. The princess hoped that their next meeting would not go the same way. The priest swore that this would never happen again. He wished Miss Prusse good night and kissed her hand tenderly. Then he held out a ball of light, saying that it was a blessing and that she should accept it as a token of apology. A second later, the priest and his servant disappeared. Returning to their chambers, the maids saw blood on the princess's dress and panicked, thinking that she was wounded. Elsie reassured them that she was fine, but now she was tired and wanted to rest. She sat on the bed and thought about what had happened, then realized that the cheek that was injured no longer hurt. Could it all be because of the blessing? It seemed like the priest she injured was okay too. The princess's calm was interrupted by a knock on the door. Someone very persistently wanted to get into her room. It was her former maid who came to inform that His Highness wanted to meet the princess and asked to bring her to his room. Elsie thought she had explained everything clearly to him last time, saying that nothing would come of it. Weren't words enough? It seemed like this evening was never ending for the princess. She was going to go to the prince, and if that was the case, she would have to explain it to him more clearly. Elsie had not been in the crown prince's room for a very long time. Now, heading to his room, the princess remembered something. Indeed, the last time she was there was when she was notified of the break in the engagement. This castle was full of her memories wherever she went. These memories kept coming back to Elsie's mind. Especially the prince's room, there were so many memories in it. The princess was not here very often, but every time she came, something special happened. Every time my heart was ready to jump out of my chest. It was on this sofa that the prince did such sweet things, completely unusual for him, and also whispered sweet words to Elsie. The girl was definitely happy then, but that also came at a price. She liked it when the prince affectionately called her by name and cooked all sorts of delicious things just for her. Now all this made no sense. Entering His Highness's room, an incredibly sexy prince stood in front of Elsie. Looking into her eyes, he asked her to sit down. The girl was very interested in why he invited her at such a late hour. It seemed the prince was not going to speak, but the princess had an idea for that occasion. In a completely calm voice, Lady Pruss asked him if he had been to Navia. Elsie saw no reaction to the question of whether the prince didn't know about the relationship between the high priest and Lady Lawrence, although even if he did know, he still couldn't do anything about it. Finally, His Highness spoke. He was convinced that the princess had not changed one bit. She pretended that she didn't care about anything, and the prince understood this from her face. A face that was indifferent to him. The princess couldn't understand what was going on at all. Perhaps the prince was afraid of what Lady Lawrence would say. But that couldn't be it. Elsie asked her to remove her hand immediately. The guy looked into the girl's eyes and asked if he should remove it. The princess really didn't want to repeat it twice, but it seemed the prince didn't understand the first time. Miss Pruss demanded once again that His Highness remove his hand and go to his princess. These words angered the guy. He approached Elsie and asked, even now, sitting alone in his room in the evening, she still continues to think about Lady Lawrence. With pity in his eyes, His Highness asked if the girl was really going to leave the castle. She confirmed this, adding that this place was not for her. The princess also recalled that it was the prince who caused her desire to leave the castle when he suddenly informed her of the breakup, and now she had no reason to stay in the castle any longer. Elsie was less willing to answer other questions, but she had something to say about this one. When His Highness called the girl into the room, he thought that everything would be different. Lady Pruss ignored his words, only asking if that was all he wanted to say that night. As if hoping to hear something different, the prince asked again whether Elsie was really okay, despite the fact that they had separated. He thought he could ask such a question under such circumstances. His Highness spoke as if he were still a princess. The guy was incorrigible. Once again, he turned away from Lady Pruss, telling her to do as she knew best. The princess could not stand it any longer. She was very angry. She had lived her whole life for the prince, for the one who had abandoned her in an instant. All his accusations, the way he denied everything, he was rather angry at Elsie. Plucking up her courage, the princess said that she did not know what the prince had in mind, but she no longer needed him. She knew that His Highness still longed to hear that he still needed the girl, but it was beneath her dignity. Lady Pruss reiterated that it was the prince who had decided to end the relationship. Had he forgotten this truth and was now trying to involve her? But the lady was clever in suggesting that they pretend that this conversation had not taken place. However, she didn't think it was worth trusting the management of the country to a man with a short memory. Out of anger, His Highness loudly shouted the name of Elsie Pruss. The girl came up to him closely and said that she was Elsie Pruss, who almost gave him her name and his ex-fiancé. The princess almost became the owner of one of the noble families of the empire. A second later, the girl regretted showing her emotions to the prince, especially since nothing could be changed in this situation. How stupid it was. Elsie reminded that she kept her promise, did everything to become empress, when suddenly the prince broke off the engagement. Without letting her finish, he grabbed the girl's hand, pulled it towards him, and looking into her eyes, said that if she had asked him to reconsider his decision even once, everything would have been different. The princess tried to remove his hand. She was even more angered by the fact that His Highness was trying to make her the scapegoat in all this. Miss Pruss was cruel. The prince suggested that she tell everyone that she did not shed a tear over this situation and leave. She burst into tears, called the prince selfish, and ran away in tears. The girl could not contain her emotions. His Highness will live his happy life with a new lady. She, as a citizen of the Empire, will have to praise them. However, Elsie couldn't leave things like that. The princess heard the wind from her window. The window was open, and the head of the church, Asriel, was sitting on the windowsill. The priest had an important conversation with the girl, but she did not like it, since last time he suddenly left, and now he returned willfully. Asriel began to apologize to Elsie, putting his hand on her face. He said that he did not know what had happened to the girl, but if he consoled her, he would be able to win her heart. Before the princess could answer, he noticed the marks on her hand. Taking her hand, the high priest said that it was not permissible to treat her precious body like that. A second later, Elsie was healed, and Asriel stood there satisfied that he was able to heal her. The girl only had time to say thank you when the head of the temple interrupted her again, apologizing for bursting into her bedroom. That's why the princess had a question about how he got there in the first place. Pointing to the window, Asriel said that he entered through it, which greatly surprised and frightened the girl, since it was unknown what else this man was capable of, who was able to climb through such a high window. The priest waved it off, saying that it was quite easy, since there was a tree there. Elsie quickly changed the subject. She was eager to know why Asriel had come to her. It was clearly not for fun. This reaction clearly surprised him, since he thought that as soon as the girl saw him, she would immediately drive him away or call the knights. The high priest admitted that he thought that Lady Prusse would have the opportunity to remain on the throne and continue to amaze everyone with her beauty. However, the head of the church was shocked by her decision. Elsie didn't understand what he was talking about, and then Asriel extended his hand to her. He was simply surprised when the girl took the sword and swung it at his servant with those hands without thinking. It was impressive. The princess was very tired today. She tried to hint that the high priest should not have climbed up to her. This could have been said at any other convenient opportunity. Elsie thought there must be something more important that Asriel had shown up in her bedroom at such an hour. The head of the church approached the girl, threw his cloak over her, and said that he had actually come to possess her. He saw that Elsie was having a hard time, so he wanted to take care of her, wipe away her tears when she cried, and then win her heart. The princess turned out to be stronger than Asriel thought. He thought that this was his chance, but apparently he was wrong and decided to leave. Lady Prusse assumed that this was a warning for her not to do anything stupid, since the high priest was able to kidnap her at any time and no one would even know about it, and he could also come to her whenever he wanted. True, she didn't see any other reasons here. He asked if her attitude had changed, and she answered that she didn't know, so it was a warning for him too. The imperial family locked themselves within the castle walls, so Asriel thought Elsie was a little bird who knew nothing about the outside world, but her sword skills said otherwise. The princess realized that the high priest considered her a young lady who knew nothing. He believed that the prince was the only talented and great man, but Elsie was not so simple. We were talking about the crown prince, and if you look at the path he had to go through, it deserved respect. Everyone knew that the empire flourished thanks to the reign of His Majesty the Emperor. Elsie smiled and said that it was actually her doing. If this was true, Asriel didn't understand why the girl did this. It turned out that she was forced to do so in order to take the place of the empress. The girl was very sleepy, although she was sure that she could go without sleep for 2 days. Elsie didn't want to think about it anymore, but that didn't mean she would let someone do that to her again. The princess could barely stand on her feet. She was about to fall asleep, and this was because the high priest's clothes exuded magical power. Lady Prusse fell asleep. She couldn't stand it. Asriel put her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. In her sleep, the girl said that things containing divine power should be registered as national property. To quickly close the topic, the high priest said that the imperial palace did not manage the temple, so everything was fine. And besides, the girl did not need to worry about such things. After all, now Elsie was not expected to become the empress, so the head of the church could take her away. But the girl did not hear this, as she was fast asleep. With the touch of his hand, Asriel awakened the princess, asking if their thoughts were the same. Then he could take her right now. She could have thrown off his cloak right now, but the girl didn't want to show herself in that way. She didn't want to take it off. Looking at Elsie, he wanted to sing her a lullaby and put her to sleep. The girl was beautiful. Closing her eyes, Asriel promised the princess that he would come to her again. It seems Ash was in big trouble. He was caught because he was one of those who lured student priests to get information from them about the temple. Looking at the guy, the head of the church suggested finishing him off. After a short pause, he still decided to save Ash's life, since first he needed to figure out his boss. Azrael ordered his servant that once they found out who the boss was, they were to make him beg for death. The princess's former maid asked His Holiness where his cloak was. With a smile on his face, he said that he gave it to the princess. Approached the maid, the head of the church asked her if she could handle his errands. She replied that of course she could. Her actions were disrespectful to the princess, but the girl had to be loyal to His Holiness for saving her sick child. Everything she had to do was a trifle compared to the life of her baby. Even if the maid has to betray her mistress and watch her every step, she will be obliged to do it for the sake of her beloved baby. Waking up the next morning, Elsie felt great. Her gaze immediately fell on the cloak of the high priest. Remembering what happened yesterday, the girl could not believe it. She was sure that she had dreamed it. The princess began to blame herself for losing her vigilance. After investigating the high priest, she only realized that it was too difficult to find out information about him. His divine power was so warm, having felt it just once, I didn't want to forget it. The maids came to the princess's room with a box containing the accessories delivered to her. The girl wondered if these were the accessories that her mother had sent her. Last time she said she sent them, but her mother was not the type of person who would just send a gift. The maids were so courting the princess, it meant only one thing, that their attitude had changed in a few days, or rather, had become the same as it had been before. They were the ones who turned away from Elsie when the prophecy changed. In any case, it was hard to imagine the lady from the prophecy looking less charming. As expected, the girl was satisfied with the result. The ladies did not stop talking. One wanted to treat the princess to honey, which her mother had brought from the Principality of Luster. The second was going to give her a precious stone discovered in the mines. Lady Pruss merely expressed her gratitude, saying that she would be glad to receive any of the gifts. Then the girl remembered, the precious red stone found on the territory of Pavlin. Wasn't it the very stone that the girl was going to give to Lady Lawrence? The girls froze in surprise, and then referred to the fact that these were all rumors. Recently, a rare and beautiful red gemstone that had never been seen before was found in Pavlin's estate. But that is just the official story. In fact, the Count hid the fact that the stone had been found a year earlier in order to earn more money from it. The Count made 2 tiaras and decorated them with this stone. He wanted to give one to Lady Pruss and the other to the Empress. The princess was extremely surprised, because since ancient times, tiaras with red precious stones have been an exclusive feature of the royal family. Elsie replied that she would gladly accept such a gift. These feigned conversations tired her, and the princess hinted that the lady had to go, and she wanted to rest. There was something strange about it all, despite the fact that Lady Lawrence had become a taboo subject in society circles, whether it was worth treating the princess like that. No matter how Elsie looked at these decorations, it didn't look like they had been sent by her mother. It was all not her style. The princess thought that it couldn't be that the imperial family would just abandon the child of prophecy. The girl came to Ash to find out what happened. They have been seeing each other quite often lately, so it was worth calling the guy something else. If anyone finds out it's him, they'll be in trouble. She pointed to the heart-shaped brooch. The next time the princess wears that brooch, it means she needs Ash. The brooch was beautiful and immediately caught the eye, and besides, it suited the girl very well. The boy must have been very busy these days, so Lady Pruss gave him the opportunity to rest, since she was going for a ride with the horses after lunch anyway. Ash started screaming that he didn't need rest. It was the least he could do for the princess. The boy apologized for not being able to find more information about Lady Lawrence and the High Priest. Elsie reassured him. Ash had already done a lot for her, and she entrusted this task to her father. Now the girl wanted to know if the guy had heard any rumors lately. Rumors tended to spread from the lower to the higher, which was why Ash's father had placed him in a lowly position. The princess said that the ladies of the court had been behaving extremely strangely lately. Despite everything that had happened, they had again begun to behave as if the lady were the crown princess. Ash wasn't sure about it yet, so he didn't say anything. There were rumors that His Holiness had chosen Elsie as the next saint. In the Empire, the word saint had 2 meanings. The first was a being who cared for the safety of people, and in the second sense, it was the name given to the wife of a holy father. The princess thought, even if a person belonging to the temple decides to marry, he will not be allowed to do so, since it is strictly forbidden. There was an exception. The Holy Father could correct this if he wanted. Ash couldn't believe that the head of the church wanted to make the princess his wife. He asked the girl what he could do for her, maybe distract the public from this. Elsie asked not to think about these rumors. She was going to meet the high priest in person soon and ask him about the situation. However, now it was worth thinking about how to use this. Maybe it was her parents who started the rumors. It was unlikely. although these rumors were only to her advantage. It was an unofficial rumor, so Elsie did not suffer any harm from it. Besides, compared to the status of the abandoned former crown empress, this was even better. This news upset Ash, he asked the lady. She doesn't have divine power. No matter how much he thought that Elsie Proust could become a saint, it was wrong. So why did they choose her? The girl suggested that always, then and now, it is simply an attempt to choose someone based on political interests. At that time, marriage was rare, and even more so, marrying for love. Ash admitted that he no longer wanted to see the princess held hostage by an unwanted marriage. The guy was extremely depressed. Elsie wondered if marrying the crown prince was not her desire. She didn't even know, because at some point she took this marriage for granted. She didn't care whether she wanted it or not. In any case, initially the princess only wanted to take a place next to him. Lady Pruss began to reassure Ash that these were just rumors. But then the guy asked if she wanted to deal with this alone. Did she know of any way to do it? The girl gently stroked the guy's face. This conversation was pointless, but she was pleased that he was so worried about her. Elsie really wanted Ash to take care of himself first. She asked him to tell her right away if he was in trouble. Her father did not say this, but it seemed to the princess that there were a couple more spies hiding in the castle. Ash was going to try harder because he couldn't help. He was forced to watch Lady Pruss from afar, and that made his heart heavy. The girl was incredibly grateful to the guy, even though he thought that he was not doing anything special except helping her out in difficult times. When Elsie first came to this unfamiliar castle, Ash arrived there with her, and he did not even realize how much he helped the princess. The girl believed that if it weren't for her faithful assistant, she would be completely different now. Ash, on the contrary, said that without him the lady would have reached the status of a bride. The guy admitted that he lives only for the princess, so she can use him as much as she wants. He was even ready to give his life for the girl, considering it the greatest happiness. The people at the Duke's residence were surprised to see Ash in such a state. Many wondered if he had emotions because he always said and did everything like a robot. Elsie really wanted others to see the guy as he appeared to her. Ash said words that struck the princess. He did not want her to not know grief and sorrow, the difficulties of illness, and to shed her precious tears no more. After all, the fact that Lady Proust did not cry in front of the guy did not mean that her soul was not full of sadness. Since Ash had promised to obey the princess, she wanted him to go and rest right now. That was all she wanted from him now. As she was leaving, the lady turned around and said with a sly smile that she had completely forgotten to warn him that she would be kidnapped in a couple of days. Elsie didn't want to wake up someone who was probably up late working, but she had to pass on what she had learned from Ash as quickly as possible. She walked into her brother's room and opened the curtains, letting in the morning light. Rias barely opened his eyes. He was of course glad to see his sister, but not at such an early hour. Elsie said that the high priest came to her last night. Supposedly he wanted to talk to her about something important, but they were never able to talk. The brother was glad that everything ended this way. Since he did not know what kind of person Azriel was, it was dangerous to be alone with him. The princess said that the high priest looked younger than she thought. He was about her brother's age, and he was also very impressive. It seems that the head of the church was truly dangerous. He was different from all the priests. Rias noticed that the previous high priests were quite incompetent. High priests are usually quite lenient and kind. With rare exceptions, they are capable of reprimanding someone and are not particularly sociable. They were afraid of being hated by someone. They were one of the few who have absolute power but cannot use it. Until now, peasantry had only seen such high priests, so Elsie's fears were not unfounded. After listening to Ash's story, the princess realized that he could not be taken lightly, especially since there were rumors that Azriel was going to make the girl a saint. If this was a statement that the high priest was going to take Elsie as his wife, Rias didn't understand what he was trying to achieve with this. One thing was for sure, Azriel liked the princess, and this was a great opportunity for her. The crown princess of the imperial castle, who became the most noble lady moreover, the only princess who received unprecedented fame in the empire. However, the princess had one flaw, the flaw of the brooch that was left at the altar. There were rumors that the high priest wanted to make Elsie Proust his saint, in which case the girl would remove the stigma of being abandoned. The girl was sure that now the high priest could not find a better candidate. By the way, Elsie needed her brother's help regarding her kidnapping. According to her plan, the crown prince was supposed to kidnap the princess. If he kidnapped her and locked her in a dungeon, then most likely the 4th squad of knights would keep an eye on her. There were a couple of interesting guys among them. Rias didn't understand why his sister thought the prince would kidnap her, but the girl believed that if she were in his place, she would want to keep someone like her to herself. The boy grabbed his head. It was just his sister's assumption. But Elsie believed that His Highness needed to be pushed towards this. She was sure that he had thought about this method more than once. At this point, his only chance to imprison Elsie was to frame her for a crime, and then he would begin to gradually lure the princess to his side. First of all, there should always be a couple of people next to her, if you think about it. There was a commotion recently, because the prince of the kingdom of Ashura locked up a commoner in a dungeon with whom he had an unrequited love. Elsie was sure that this story was already circulating around the castle and would soon reach the crown prince. The princess did all this on purpose because she wanted to check something. Rias had absolutely nothing to say to her sister about all this, but as he understood, the girl was not going to return with him to the duke's mansion. Lady Pruss thought it would be better this way. The brother believed that if her soul wanted to stay here, then he would not be able to stop her in any way. Elsie could not go with her brother because she did not want to leave her affairs to others. Initially, she was supposed to bring security and stability to the empire. That was her task. But now she was going to make things right. Rias didn't think all of this was that important, because if her sister wanted to return home, she would have returned. To be honest, she had planned it all this way from the start, accepting this separation as God's will. If this was someone's cunning plan, then whoever dared to touch Pesantri, whoever displaced her and dishonored her in the eyes of the people, had to be punished. If Elsie returned to the Duke's mansion right now, she would be able to take a break from all this, and Rias promised to take care of everything. The girl should not forget that her father and mother were always behind her. If she wanted to take a break from all this, no one would say a word to her, but if she had already made her final decision, there was no point in dissuading the princess. Elsie had no plans to return to the Duke's mansion now. That was her final answer. Still, the girl thought about her brother's words about rest. After all, she had been running around like crazy all her life. She shouldn't have been in this position. She should have taken the most prestigious position in the empire. She just accepted the burden and never complained. The same thing happened when Lady Pruss began to conduct the affairs of the imperial family on behalf of the emperor and the ailing empress. She simply considered it her duty. The next step was for the girl to help the crown prince strengthen his position. At the same time, Alfredo tried to do everything for his status. Despite the fact that the victory was with the crown prince, he experienced a lot. Alfredo was able to avoid death only by renouncing the imperial family name. Since then, the boy went to war, while Elsie tried to help the life-weary crown prince. It was so hard for her, but she never thought about rest. Just think, since childhood, the princess had been looking forward to the day when she could return home. For her, it was a whole event that happened only once or twice a year. And now, no matter how much she thinks about it, she doesn't understand what kind of absurd ban on visiting her parents' house was, and why it didn't seem strange to her before. The princess's thoughts were interrupted when she received a letter. The letter sent to her contained the promised meeting, and the letter was from the high priest himself. A whole week had passed since their last meeting. Elsie thought that Azriel would make an appointment with her earlier. She was going to return the robe to him, but she was very sorry to part with its warmth. The girl even thought about buying this thing back. Having sealed the envelope, the princess asked the high priest to deliver it personally. Before they had even left Lady Pruss's office, the ladies of the court began to whisper that the rumors were true, and they were going to tell everyone about it. As Elsie thought, rumors are already circulating throughout the palace. However, no one even knows who the high priest is. By the way, the festival was already just around the corner. The celebration of the founding of the empire, one of the few important days in which the temple played an important role. Now the identity of the high priest was shrouded in mystery, but very soon, at such an important holiday, Azriel would have to reveal his identity. To be honest, the princess herself thought that she would only recognize this person at the festival itself. Azriel and the high priest, Elsie would never have thought that they were the same person. He was too young, and his character didn't quite fit. Now, there were people the princess had to worry about more than the head of the church. She remembered the prince. They separated on the day of the celebration. The girl thought that soon he would want to return everything. To be honest, the girl was a little worried that Azriel would come up with an excuse for his rude behavior that night. It was so quiet in the office that it couldn't help but please Elsie. She loved silence madly. She wanted to send a letter to her parents now, but then she realized that she could be caught. The princess did not have a single reliable way to send a letter. Lady Pruss decided that if anything happened, her parents would find a way to contact her themselves, but for now, she should just enjoy the silence. Rias was also heading to an audience with His Majesty the Emperor, so he could relax now. The princess decided that now was the time to read a book, especially since she couldn't remember the last time she had spent time on herself. Elsie's silence was broken by the second Prince Alfredo knocking on the door. It turned out that the guy just wanted to see the girl. He just asked to be with her. She could not refuse him. Alfredo understood that the princess was going to read, since he caught her at the moment when she was looking for something suitable. His eyes lit up. The second prince loved to read. He wanted to recommend a book to Elsie, but the problem was that she didn't know what she liked, since the last book she read was the history of the empire. The guy enthusiastically rushed to look for something interesting for the princess. Alfredo looked for books on the very bottom shelf. Elsie never even looked at the books on that shelf. He took out some book, saying that he himself had not read it, but looking at the title, he thought that this was the one. Elsie blushed. Alfredo was holding a book, the title of which was Secrets with the Teacher. Did he really think that this book would suit the princess in terms of content? Realizing that he had found the wrong thing, the prince began to shout that he had gotten it by accident and wanted something completely different, but Elsie said with a smile that she would definitely read it. Alfredo tried to take the book away to replace it with another. The book fell out of Elsie's hands, and she stumbled. The second prince arrived in time, gently catching the girl. The guy apologized again, saying that he really wanted to get another book. Alfredo certainly looked happy and quickly changed the subject, asking if the princess was hurt. The girl was fine, but the prince took advantage of the opportunity to take the book so that Lady Prusse would not read it. Elsie heard someone rustling on her window, and when she opened the window, she saw a dove with a note on its paw. The rumors had already spread throughout the Duke's domains, but her father must have checked the veracity of the rumors. Her father had eyes everywhere and left. The rumors must have reached him quickly. Elsie didn't think the investigation had been successful, since it was the high priest himself who was involved. At the end of the letter, the girl discovered her mother's handwriting. The Duchess knew what her daughter's situation was, but she still asked for it, so that the princess could get a book that contained records of the corruption of aristocrats. The book was kept in the imperial library, which only members of the imperial family could enter. A book that describes in detail all the bribes, corruption, and how it was all covered up. Even the sins of the imperial family were in this book. Elsie couldn't understand why her mother needed this book, because if she wanted to rid herself of a family, she wouldn't need this book. The Duke's influence would be enough. There were a lot of ways to falsely accuse, create a dangerous situation, stage an accident, and get rid of them. Alfredo reminded the princess that she was not alone here. The second prince was already waiting for her. With a sly smile, the girl said that there was one book that interested her, but to find it, she needed his help. Elsie said that there was one book she would like to read, but it was in the imperial library, and she no longer had access to it. This made Alfredo a little wary, since he could not take books out of this library. The princess made a pitiful face. She hoped that the second prince would not be able to resist and would help her. As she planned, everything worked out. Alfredo promised to get this book for Elsie. It seems that the issue with Mother's request was resolved. Finally, everyone is back. A whole week has passed since the banquet. Rias couldn't understand her sister. From her appearance, it was clear that she was going somewhere, but she was planning to stay in the palace. The princess said that she was supposed to visit the temple today. The brother said that now is not the situation where Elsie can just go back to the Duke's estate, since the epidemic has returned to the Count of Eaton's estate, which is on the way. The princess was frightened, because this meant something serious. Rias was immune to the disease, but it would have been dangerous for his sister to travel through the area, as the mortality rate was high, with every second person dying. It turned out that the empire did not send aid there. The estate was isolated, however. The imperial family refused to provide support. If you think about it, the count of the estate was always at odds with the emperor. Their family always produced worthy priests, which cannot be said about the imperial family. This means that the imperial family did not want Elsie to get home, since she would not be able to pass through the contaminated territory. In this way, the prince tried to leave the princess in the capital, but even so she would be able to send a warning. Would His Highness really pretend that he was going to guard the temple? The girl thought. Rias remembered that his sister was going to the temple today, and so it was. All the aristocrats who heard about it were very interested. They said that because of them, the prayer house was overcrowded. The guy still didn't understand why Elsie was going to stay here, because it would be better for her to move to their mansion in the capital. The situation was really strange, so the princess decided to sit it out for a while. Since that was the case, Rias decided to find out what his sister wanted to talk about during the meeting with the head of the church. Rumors about Elsie and the head of the church have been some of the most talked about in recent times. Whether the head of the church would make a saint out of the girl abandoned by the oracle could not help but become an interesting topic of conversation, especially for the crown prince. There has been no reaction to this from the crown prince so far, although His Majesty the Emperor invited the princess to meet. But due to schedule, it was not possible to meet. The strange thing was that he left Elsie alone, but perhaps he was now keeping an eye on the situation in the palace. On the one hand, the hostess of the prophecy, Lawrence, made a serious mistake at the banquet, and for some reason, the oracle rejected the princess. In the eyes of others, Lady Pruss looked like the one chosen by the head of the church. Navia didn't show herself anywhere after the banquet, and thanks to her tucking her tail and hiding, it was easier for Elsie to investigate her relationship with the head of the church. Rias guessed that perhaps the prince was now thinking about whether or not to return the princess to the imperial palace. Elsie knew what they didn't want was for the temple to take her. She has given too much to the imperial family, so they will not want to lose her. Lady Pruss suggested that the easiest thing for the imperial family would be to make the girl the wife of the second Prince Alfredo. If the emperor wanted to intimidate the girl from the prophecy and the family of Duke Pruss, then he could very well use this method. Naevia, as the crown princess of prophecy, was supposed to bring peace and security to the empire, and Elsie, as the wife of the second prince, will use her abilities acquired during the time when she was going to become empress and devote herself entirely to the empire. For His Majesty, this was the most ideal scenario. Rias concluded that, if it was as his sister said, it would be quite difficult to become a saint. Elsie asked if her brother would go to the temple with her, but the boy refused because he had some business. Rias was going to the capital. The princess, when she found out about this, asked him to bring her a dagger. Luckily, my brother knew a good craftsman, so he promised to make it to order. Suddenly, Elsie realized that she had no uniform. The carriage had broken down, so she would have to go by horse, and there was no suitable uniform. Unfortunately, the girl had no choice but to go with the escort assigned by the emperor. Rias handed his dagger to his sister. They didn't know where and what could happen, so it was better to have a weapon with you. Besides, the guy could use any other. The prince considered taking Ash with him, but he was refused, assigned an imperial escort, explaining that there was no need for the duke's men. Come to think of it, the escort provided by the palace was replaced every few months. It seems His Majesty was afraid that Elsie would bribe them. Rias carefully placed the necklace around her sister's neck, and then she remembered that today was that day. The preparations were completed. The sister asked her brother to take care of everything while she was at the temple. These men were the eyes and ears of the emperor, 14 of them, too many to accompany the duke's only daughter who was going to the temple. At first glance, it might seem that the emperor cares very much about Elsie, but who knows if this is really the case. Hiram Matilda, the second son of Count Matilda, deputy of the 4th detachment, which was to accompany the princess. Turning to his sister, Rias insistently asked her to accompany him to the exit. The aristocrats, seeing this scene, will again fawn on Lady Pruss, and the girl will have to suffer a little. Rias asked his sister, if she didn't mind, to stay close to Hiram Matilda. The prince believed that the guy was one of those she liked. It turned out that Rias had given Hiram instructions to break away from the other knights, stay close to the princess, and guard her. The prince trusted him, and that was the only reason he left his only sister in his care. Elsie was glad to be alone with the knight, that they would finally be able to talk about something important that they had not been able to discuss all this time. The princess was very interested to know if Hiram knew her brother. It turned out that they had sparred several times. On the way, they were surrounded by commoners who immediately recognized Lady Pruss. The knight offered her to put on a cloak if she felt uncomfortable. The girl refused. Everything was fine. It was good, of course, to show off her face in front of people, but the fact that she sat behind the knight's back harmed her reputation. The doors to the temple were closed. The guards had no intention of opening them. Hiram Matilda stopped his horse abruptly, not understanding what was happening and why they were not being allowed to go. Lady Pruss appeared from behind him. The gates opened immediately, and it turned out that the guards did not recognize the guest the first time. Elsie was lucky with her hair. This hair color proved her status. The only time they secretly left the palace with the prince was when there was a big fuss about their faces being revealed. After that, they could no longer leave the palace with the crown prince under cover. However, at such moments it was very convenient. Before Lady Pruss became the heroine of prophecy and the crown princess involved in politics, the temple and the imperial palace were in serious conflict. After taking the princess to the temple, Hiram was going to go and carry out the lady's errand, and if she needed anything, she could turn to any of the other knights. The The priest bowed before the girl, saying that they were glad to see her and had been expecting her arrival. Initially, the temple was snow-white, clean, without a single decoration. All the changes were made by Azrael. The temple was truly beautiful, all by his grace. Elsie Pruss bowed before His Holiness, saying that she had come at the call of heaven. The princess did not want to observe any formalities, since she was already acquainted with the head of the temple, and she did not want to play some incomprehensible game. Azrael agreed, so they got straight to the point, asking the girl if she had anything to tell him. Elsie Pruss was very curious as to why the head of the church had spread such rumors about her. With a sly smile on his face, he asked if she didn't like the way everyone treated her. The rumor that the high priest had set his sights on the princess must have made the imperial family very nervous. Couldn't Elsie have been so upset about it? At the same time, her honor was also restored. The princess understood that if Azrael caught her now, everything would be over. The head of the church told Elsie that she need not worry because he was doing all this for her. The girl was outraged by such an act. He did not care about her opinion. She did not like such one-sided actions, despite the fact that it was his idea, but the fact that he did it without her knowledge angered the princess. Azrael was very curious as to how it was possible that such a lady lived as the emperor's puppet. The girl didn't behave the way the high priest wanted, so was that why he said all this on purpose? The princess stood up and warned that if their conversation continued in the same spirit, she would simply leave. Azrael placed his hand on the princess's hand, and again, with the same sarcasm, asked where she was rushing to in such a hurry. Lady Pruss understood perfectly well that just as she needed him, he needed her too, in which case she could be more generous. She suggested leaving useless conversations and getting down to the main thing. Since the girl herself suggested getting to the main point, Azrael was not going to rant and asked directly if she had thought about becoming his. Whether there is divine power or not, the very fact of the existence of the saint had great symbolic meaning. Like the head of the church, the saint shows her face only at important events. Elsie clarified, by offering her to become his, he meant for her to become a temple person, or she had misunderstood everything. The head of the church confirmed her assumption. At that moment, the girl seemed to fall into the ground, which meant the rumor was not just a rumor. In any case, for the vast majority of aristocrats in the empire, marriage was a kind of deal, a deal in which the other side is looked at, calculated, and studied. With a smile on her face, Elsie asked Azrael what he would do if he was refused. The head of the church did not believe that the princess could really answer like that. She had options, but it seemed that in this situation, the high priest had taken the initiative. When the enemy took the initiative, it was necessary to hide one's weaknesses even better. Elsie Pruss decided to ask again if His Holiness understood the meaning of the appointment to the place of sainthood. Azrael asked with a smirk, how could it be that he didn't know that? The princess asked him because she thought the high priest was missing the significance of this act. The position of saint had hitherto been an unofficial position, always vacant unless something truly important happened. His Holiness was now about to install the crown prince's former fiancé in that position. Azrael warned the princess that if this were to happen, she would have to bend the knee to her ex-fiancé. Miss Lawrence will follow the path that the princess paved with her own efforts and time. Also before the crown prince, who, afraid of the change in the oracle, broke off the marriage agreement with Elsie. In that case, Lady Pruss will have to bow her head. If she accepts the offer of the head of the church, then she will have the status that does not require her to bend the knee to the crown prince who used her. Azrael could give the girl something like that, believing that it should be enough for her. From all this, the princess asked what the high priest would receive in this case. What benefit would it bring him? There are more people who want the position of partner of the head of the church than those who want the position of empress. Even the emperor couldn't help but be wary of this position, and the person holding this status didn't have to perform duties as an emperor or empress. So for Elsie, this was the best option. Perhaps even turning the entire empire upside down, or even looking in other countries, it would be difficult to find such a partner. For Elsie, this was obvious. The current head of the church didn't seem incompetent, so what did he want to achieve by making the princess his partner? Azrael didn't understand why the princess thought he wouldn't get anything, when he would get the main prize, Elsie Pruss. The girl didn't understand what was good about him getting her. The head of the church could gain a lot from simply being near the duke's daughter, and he also believed that the girl herself understood this perfectly well. His eyes lit up at the thought of making a woman like Elsie his own. The princess reminded that she was not someone's thing. If His Holiness really wanted to be with her, then he could become hers. Azrael immediately agreed. If the girl wanted it, then so be it. Lady Pruss asked if that was all he wanted to tell her. It seemed to her that there was something more important, and the girl was not mistaken. Asriel took out a black envelope from the desk drawer. It was the will of the former head of the church. The princess swore to remain silent about everything she heard in it. The high priest believed that the girl guessed its contents. Most of the wills of the heads of the church expressed hope for peace and stability of the empire, but the will of the previous head of the church was not public. The fact that the previous head of the church kissed Elsie on the forehead and gave her a blessing was widely known, but that was all. Apart from this, Elsie Proust had no more one-on-one meetings with him. If the contents of the will were related to her, then the princess was very curious about what was written there. Asriel warned that if the girl was going to listen to this story, she should pull herself together. The oracle was wrong. The words that Elsie Proust, becoming the crown princess, would bring peace and stability to the empire were a lie from the very beginning. The girl couldn't believe it. Her legs wobbled. It all sounded like a stupid dream. It would be better if the oracle changed overnight. It would be better if Navia was the one the oracle spoke of. The princess thought at that moment. Asriel tried to bring the girl to her senses. The contents of the oracle were wrong, but that didn't mean the oracle itself was a lie. Her heart was torn apart, in which case she did not understand what was the lie, the part about her becoming the wife of the crown prince, or the part about the man who would bring peace and stability to the empire. Elsie began to think that perhaps the problem all this time was not with them, but with herself. Now the content of the oracle she received was a lie. Was that fair for her? Gently taking the girl's face, Asriel asked if it would make her happy if it turned out to be a lie that she was supposed to be the crown princess. To ensure peace and stability in the empire, the emperor used Elsie as a tool. The princess did not believe it. She began to scream that no one had used her. The head of the church tried to open her eyes to all this. Did the girl really think so? She was locked in the imperial palace and not allowed to leave. Even if this was not the path Elsie was supposed to take, she was forced to follow it. An emperor who cruelly demanded to exceed his capabilities, if that is not use, then what is? It seems that His Holiness did not understand the princess. Such were all aristocrats. Even if it was not the road Elsie was meant to take, many aristocrats would have sold themselves to take it. One thing was clear. The emperor never demanded anything from the princess that she could not do. The high priest couldn't believe his ears. Elsie was defending the emperor who had been using her all this time. The princess still tried to defend her vision of the situation, and besides, she always had enough abilities. Drawing Asriel's attention to the window, she asked if he knew what was behind it. The clock tower built there was ordered to be built by Lady Prusse. Aristocrats didn't know it, but for ordinary people, watches were a luxury item. Subjects without watches use sunset and sunrise to arrange meetings. That is why the princess built a clock tower in the very center of the capital, so that everyone could check the time whenever they wanted. When this tower was being built, Elsie thought of only one thing, that she wanted it and no one else. All the aristocrats were against the construction of this tower. It was a luxury, and they did not understand why such a useless thing was built in the center of the capital. But when the princess wanted it, everyone shut their mouths. Everything she did had a plan, so Lady Proust did not consider her actions useless, and in the end, everyone who was against it fell silent and agreed. This meant only one thing, that Elsie Proust had created her own place. Whether she would be used by the emperor or discarded as a useless pawn, she thought about that too. In fact, the princess still continued to think about it, but everything was not like that at all. When she built this tower, she had a plan. When the tower became a local landmark, tourism revenues increased. The productivity and efficiency of her subjects increased when they learned to tell time. The emperor, who turned his back on the princess, and the crown prince, who turned his back on her, missed one thing, even though they gave Elsie a position. But in the position of crown princess, she learned and gained a lot. After listening to everything the princess told, Asriel changed his mind. He believed that power was not so important to her. What was important to her was not power, but the sweet taste it gave. For someone who spoke of sympathy for power, the princess was too selfless. For those who didn't cross a certain line, Elsie was a benevolent empress of the future. She was very curious about what would happen if the girl began to cooperate with the high priest. In that case, he will have to keep this trait and try to seduce her. Elsie left the head of the church's office. She thought that he would see her out, but this did not happen. As he said goodbye, he told her that she could do whatever she wanted without him. Asriel also gave permission to use his name at his own discretion. Elsie didn't even know where and how she could use his name. As she left the temple, the princess was attacked by a crowd who bombarded her with questions about whether she remembered each of them. A priest came out of the church. He was shocked by this lack of manners. Now other believers were busy with prayer. He warned that if the citizens did not calm down immediately, then the church would not remain on the sidelines either. The girl could not believe that the bishop could expel the believers for something like that. Elsie recognized him, the bishop who cooperated with Navia, and the one who caused her a lot of worries. It was a joy to see him like this. After that incident, he locked himself in the temple, so it was difficult to see him. Elsie stood up for the priest, saying that there was nothing wrong with what the bishop said, because everyone knows that the temple is a place where one must remain calm. The princess said that the bishop must have a lot to do, so they had better go somewhere else and talk there. Elsie went to have tea with the aristocrats, of course. There was one topic of discussion, that the bishop really went too far, raising his voice in the presence of the princess. Lady Pruss stood up for the church, saying that nothing could be done about their pride. The new head of the church was an outstanding man, so the bishop could not do anything about his pride either. The noblewoman said that she had seen the imperial knights in front of the temple, asking if Sir Hiram Matilda was standing there. Sir Matilda was the second in command of the 4th Squadron, and the lady was amazed that the emperor himself had sent him as an escort. It seems that the emperor took great care of Elsie Pruss, not only His Majesty, but also His Holiness. The princess shared that the head of the church wanted to assign holy knights to her, but since she already had knights from the palace with her, she regretfully refused. If someone were to ask Elsie where she stands now, she would be able to explain it with ease. The emperor's faction was afraid that the princess would go over to the temple's side and kept an eye on her, and those who didn't were just flattering her, no matter what. It wasn't bad for her. The aristocrats were interested in what the head of the temple really was like. There were rumors that His Holiness was too young and handsome. Elsie confirmed these rumors. One of the aristocrats, having plucked up the courage, asked what kind of relationship Lady Pruss had with His Highness. Finally, the princess realized who the man who asked the question was. She hadn't seen the count for a long time, although his face was not so easy to forget. Whenever Elsie was about to take a breather at a formal event, the Earl was the one who would approach the girl and strike up a conversation. There was nothing strange in the fact that as a member of the faction he was interested in her relationship with the prince. The influence of the count's family was not particularly high, so the emperor did not even remember him. Lady Pruss asked what was the reason for such interest in her relationship with His Highness. The aristocrat said that everyone was very interested, although they pretended that it was not so, because the princess was still continuing to stay in the castle of the crown princess. Although the time had come for the crown prince and Miss Lawrence to announce their engagement, there was no progress. This is the reason why His Majesty the Emperor does not notice the count. He did not separate what could be said from what could not. The aristocrat believed that this was because Elsie still liked her position as crown princess. After all, everyone seemed interested in the conversation, but Lady Pruss had no reason to reveal the whole truth. Getting up from the table, the princess said that everything was happening according to the will of His Highness, and not according to hers. After these words, the girl left with a smile on her face. Her brother was already waiting for her, and that's where she turned away. The aristocrats remained sitting with their mouths open in surprise. Sir Hiram Matilda reported that he had prepared the most suitable clothes for the princess. The sister and brother sent the knights first, intending to go after them. They assumed that they were specially assigned by His Majesty the Emperor. The princess changed into the new clothes prepared for her. She looked great even in pants. The horse that her brother prepared for her was very similar to her mother's favorite horse. It had been a long time since the brother and sister had gone out together. One could say that it was the first time. Elsie was good enough on a horse that she felt she could not be called Lady Pruss if she could not handle even one horse. The girl looked quite cheerful about the trip, so the brother promised that when they returned, he would prepare a horse for her. She was very grateful, because Elsie had dreamed of riding a horse alone at sunset. If she could take Ash to the duchy with her, it wouldn't be a bad idea to look after the horse with him. Finally, the princess was able to ask the question that had long interested her. Why did her brother participate in the war? Rias didn't get anything from going to war. All he got was honors, nothing more. Elsie knew that honor was not important to her brother, and besides, he did not give orders from the rear or direct the army, but fought with a sword at the front. Brother went there, exposing himself to mortal danger. Did he get anything from this war? There was no serious reason, but if his sister had known the reason, she would have dissuaded him from participating in the war. Elsie was sure that her brother had not gained anything great from the war. Rias had made a good image for himself in the eyes of the Empire's subjects and had become the hero of the Sepia kingdom by paying off its debts, but the gain was not worth risking his life. It turned out that those weren't all the reasons. Rias received something else along with all the honors. Elsie also knew that her brother had received a small territory in the mountains, but she considered it a completely useless place. This was the main reason. It turns out that this mountain was covered with precious stones.